Good morning. My name is John Cacavaro. I'm the Chief Architect of Radius. I'm here today to do a deep dive on our resource access services, in particular, validation. This is being recorded without the benefit of any guests, so there won't be any questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or call me directly. Okay, so let's get started. What I'm going to be showing are going to be extending the discussion from yesterday's training session on access services. And yesterday we spoke of a service in the training domain called the car access service. So I'm going to show my screen and we'll get going. So just very quick review. We have a resource access service here called the car access. It is in the training domain. Yesterday we built out the get car operation, but we stopped short of putting validations on it. So the get car operation has a get car request and a get car response. And as I said, we did write the get car operation yesterday. Nice and clean, couple methods, assign car and map car. Gets the car from the database, maps that entity, which is underscore car, into an entity, a data contract, and puts it into the response. Nice and clean and easy. It was a great question brought up yesterday by Bhushan, and he said it was something to the effect about validations and what happens here if there was no car returned. So that's where we're going to pick up today. Frameworks has built into it some fairly sophisticated and yet simple validation mechanisms. Before I show you the validation mechanism, I want to go to the service artifact. The artifact is, I'm using artifact in such a way that it is a document or a code unit that Frameworks creates for us. So one of those artifacts is car access, and that can be found in the generated folder of the service and in the implementation folder. So you're looking at some generated code now. I want to show you that we attach a service behavior attribute on top of this class, and that mimics what the model is telling us to do. So on the model, we declared a per call instance context mode and a multiple concurrency mode along with some other attributes for the service behavior, and that's attached to the car access service. I also want you to note that the car access service will implement iCar access, which is another artifact that is created by Frameworks, and it is in fact the WCF service contract. There is also another interface that the car access implements, and that's iCar access direct. So let's take a look at that. Not much in there. iCar access direct implements iCar access. And iCar Access Direct is a way to bypass WCF so that we can use the car access service without the benefit of service behaviors and serializations and transactions and all of the other nice things WCF does for us. We can just use this as a plain class. And that helps in testing, and also if we need to call an operation of a service very quickly, consecutively, in a very short period of time, and do not want to incur the overhead of WCF. It's a more rare case, but it is there. So let's talk about the car access method that Frameworks creates for us. And as we can see, it's a method that takes in a get car request and a get car and outputs a get car response, mimicking what we told it to do here. On this operation, we said that The input data contract is a get car request, and the output data contract is a get car response. And that artifact is created with that desire in mind. So let's just walk through the code real quickly. Frameworks will create the response object, and then it will resolve the get car operation. It will create an object cache, and I will talk about that in a few moments. It assigns the object cache to the get car operation, and then it calls the car operation, retrieves the response, and finally returns the response. So that's automatically done for you. Now, let's add some validation to this. One of the validations that we might want to implement is that the consumer should send us a car ID that is no less than 1. If they request a car with a car ID of 0, by convention and the way we use our primary keys in the database, we know that it's going to return null. So there's no reason taking the database hit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into the properties for the car ID property, and I'm going to set the minimum value of the car ID to 1. I'm going to tell frameworks to generate the validate minimum value method, as it's called. And if this validation kicks in, and in fact, if the property is less than 1, then I'm going to specify a particular enum to be included in the validation method. So I'm going to create that enum here. I can say car ID less than 1. Go back to my property and specify, well, it's still saying none. And the reason for that is because I have to go to the request data contract, and I have to tell frameworks to generate the validator and to use the get car enum that we've created here. Now when I go back to the property, I should see that, yes, in fact, the car ID less than 1 enum is there. And that's what frameworks will use to respond back to the user in order to tell them that they need to send us an ID that is greater than 0. Now, why do we do that and not a string? Well, a string, if we sent back only a string, then the compiler can't help us. And when we write our test, then we would have to write our test and we would have to assert against a validation method that that's a string. In the case of an enum, the compiler will help us because it will tie a value, an enum value, and we can write our test and we can assert that the get car enum dot car ID less than 1 has been given back to us. And that's a much, much stronger way of testing. So now let's save the model. And by saving the model, frameworks will regenerate its artifacts. So let's go back to the car access now, and let's look at what this now looks like. So it looks a little different. It still creates a response object. It still resolves the get car operation. Still creates a cache and assigns the cache to the get car operation. And now what it does, and I'll just put a space here so we can highlight it, it's going to resolve an iGetCarRequestValidator object and push that in or assign it to the getCar operation. And it's going to set the getCar request to the input of this operation, getCar request. It's going to send to it the object cache, and it's going to tell that getCar request validator to validate. Let's go look at that. So this is also a frameworks generated unit, and we specified one validation, and the validation we just specified on frameworks was to validate the minimum car ID. And we can see here that Frameworks wrote some code for us. If getCarRequest.carID is greater than or equal to 1, return. We return early. It makes our code nice and clean. And otherwise, to create a new validation result and puts in a piece of text, car ID cannot be less than 1, but also adds that enum that I was talking about. So a user can, or a tester or a developer, can then verify that when they send the car ID, when they send in the request object a car ID that is less than 1, then they should be testing for this particular enum. One point about the testing of this validation is we actually would not even write it because we don't test code that Frameworks has written. That's the job of the Frameworks testing suite. We give it a validation code, and then we add that particular validation result to the validation results. Going back to car access, we can see that if the getCarOperation.getCarRequestValidated.validation results is not valid, which it wouldn't be because the validator just said that the ID was less than 1, then we set the validation results to the response object and return. The operation is never called. Your handwritten operation is never called, and that's a really good thing because the time you get into that operation, you can assume that all the validations had already passed and you can just go ahead and work. Okay, let's get a little bit more sophisticated now. Let's add another type of validation. We will, in fact, keep our validate minimum value, but we will also add what's called an entity validation. An entity validation will validate that the car ID, there is a car in the database with car ID specified from the user. Let's take a look at that. So we're going to turn this on to true. We're going to validate against an entity called car. And if it's not valid, we're going to set our enum, and I've already set the enum here. I've already created an enum called car not found. And I will say, car not found is specified there. And this property, which I can set to none, this property is a property that is used in the select statement. So in other words, if I wanted to, the default would be the property that I am specifying in the validation, which is the car ID. But for some reason, if I wanted to check a different property, say color or something, then I would specify the property here, and then the query would do a select star from car where color equals something instead of car ID equals something. Okay, so let's save this and let's look at our car access and let's see what happened. So the car access didn't change. The car access service, the get car operation of the car access service did not change. It still creates a validator. But if we now were to look at this validator, we can see that it is not only validating against the min car ID, but it is also validating against the database itself. So let's check that out. So Frameworks wrote this method where it says var entity equals car DAO. So it's invoking another class that Frameworks has generated, the car DAO, get by ID, get car request. And if the entity does not equal null, we're going to put that entity into the object cache that I was talking about. And we can utilize that entity in our operation. But if the car is not there, then we create that validation message and the operation is never called. So now with this in mind, with the fact that we have already hit the database for the car and already have that car in hand, the car is actually in hand, what I mean is it is in the object cache. Let's go and modify our get car operation to take advantage of this fact. So previously, when we assigned the car, we were going out to the car DO and getting the car. Well, we don't even need to do that anymore because it was already done in the validation method. So let's not hit the database again because database hits are very, very expensive. So all we need to do now is we'll just comment that die out, and we will say underscore car equals equals the object cache, and that line of code would be, well, before I show you the line of code, let me show you that the get car operation now is missing something. It is now missing, let's see if we can get that hint. It's now missing the interface member I get car request validator. It's not implemented. So hopefully we can ask Visual Studio, or ReSharper rather, to implement that for us. Where did it put it? Put it someplace here. Put it right here. So I'm going to get this. I'm going to put it in my decorations section. Now I have this get car request validator that I can use. So I can say car equals get car request validator dot object cache dot get list of entity dot car dot first. So let's review what the validator did again. The validator put the entity in the object cache, and we utilize the object cache list to coerce it to an entity.car instead of an object, and we're going to get the first one. And we can be confident that first is always there. We don't have to do first on default, because if there was no car, then we would have never got into this operation because the service wouldn't allow it. The service would have just moved on and returned that response object. So now we can remove that. Now, in fact, I say, okay, interesting. I guess I don't even need this method anymore, do I? No, I really don't. And I don't need the private entity car. So I can just comment this out. And I can just use this if I wanted to. And one could argue, does that really look as pretty and as nice? Not really. It's a little bit more difficult to read. So I might, in fact, choose to just keep it the way it was because it seemed a little bit more simple to me. Either way, I wouldn't complain. But I think that looks a little bit more simple. And then I'm good to go. I'm done. I didn't even have to do a car DAO call, so I can in fact remove that DAO property. And that's all there is to it. It's pretty advanced. Frameworks is actually doing a lot for us, but there's no reason to write the code, so there's no reason to test the code with regard to the validator. Let's take a look at a test that we could write, however, against the car operation, the get car operation. So let's see, I think yesterday in the last discussion, we spoke of a get car test. Did we not? Get car test. Oh, here it is. It's on my other monitor. Okay, so yesterday's test was a simple one. We resolved the iGetCar operation. We sent the request, the car ID, and then we validated it. Well, this test would now not turn green, it would turn red. So it would fail. Why? Because it's not using the validator. So the object cache that I showed you would be null. No longer do we, in the operation, call the car DAO. We depend on the object cache. And in fact, the test would fail right here because there would be nothing. the object cache would be null. In fact, the get car request validator would be null. So it would be kind of a mess here. So this wouldn't even be a valid test. Well, what would be a valid test? Instead of calling the operation now, I need to call the service. So I can say IOCmanager.resolve, and I can say I get car service. It's not that at all, is it? It is the car access. I get car access, and now I can say service dot get car and give it my request object and get my response. Okay, that's better. However, I'm still depending on WCF here because I'm calling iCar access. What I really want to do is I want to call this iCar access direct, because the iCar access direct won't carry with it the WCF overhead of the service behaviors and everything else. So I use iCar access direct instead, and that allows us to use the car access like we would just simply any other class. There's nothing special about this class now with regard to WCF or serialization or anything else. And the reason why I need to use the service because I need to invoke all of this to give me a more realistic picture. So let's go ahead and try it. Let's put a breakpoint here, and we'll follow it all the way through. Debug tests. So instead now, I'm not going to say get car from operation, get car from service, returns car. Much better name. And let's debug it. So now when it should resolve to this service, it does. Good. Let's see if it goes in here. It creates the response. It resolves the iGetCar operation, creates a cache, assigns the cache to the operation, resolves the car request validator, assigns to the validator the getCar request, as well as the object, and then calls validate on the validator. And then the items in the validator will run in parallel. Let's put a breakpoint here. Let's put a breakpoint here. Actually, we don't need to see this. Let's just see the other one. Here we are. Tries to get the entity, and the entity is not null, so it sticks it in the object cache and just returns. And now I am into my operation. So when I assign the car, it will just get the car out of the object cache. So that should be not null. And it isn't. That's good. Then it's going to map the car and return the response, leave the service, and now we should have a correct response. So that's some pretty sophisticated validation there that happens without any code at all. And again, what's great about not writing code is that if we don't write code, we don't have to test code, and therefore there won't be bugs in our code. There are other validations that we could write if we wanted to. I'm not going to go through them all. But there's a validation for a GUID. Let's say that GUID can't be empty. So that's what this validation will do. We could validate the maximum value. We said that 1 was the minimum value, but we could validate a maximum value. And all these can be used in conjunction with each other, although using a GUID validation doesn't make much sense to use with an integer validation. Minimum and maximum could be used together. We could validate a string to make sure that string is not null. And as you just saw, we can validate against an entity. Great. Okay. Again, like I said earlier in the session, if you have questions, please email me or call me directly, and I will be happy to do that, answer them to the best of my ability. And I think the next section we will stay with the access service, and we will talk about the powerful mechanism that we call redactions. Thank you.